During my work trip abroad, my husband texted to say, "I'm leaving you for my young lover and our child. I've sold the house and car." I replied calmly, "All right." When I returned, he was waiting at the airport, screaming in a panic, "What happened?" I replied coldly, "Everything went just as I planned." The air in Copenhagen smelled like rain and diesel fuel, and I remember thinking it was strange that I noticed that, the particular chemical sweetness of European transit, while reading the text that was supposed to destroy me. "I'm leaving you for her. We have a child together. I've already sold the house and the car. By the time you get back, it'll all be done." I was standing in the lobby of the Radisson Blu, my rolling suitcase still warm from the taxi trunk, my lanyard badge still crooked against my blazer. A conference on sustainable infrastructure financing, 300 attendees from 47 countries. I was presenting on public-private partnership models the next morning. My phone vibrated again. "I know this is sudden, but I deserve to be happy. You can keep whatever's in the joint account. I don't want anything from you except my freedom." A bellhop asked if I needed help with my bag. I said no, thank you. I smiled at him. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor and watched the numbers climb in the mirrored doors. In the reflection, I saw a woman in her early 40s with sensible heels and a navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a low bun, her face utterly composed. I watched her check her phone again, read the messages again, and then slide the device back into her pocket. I watched her not cry. I watched her not scream. I watched her step out of the elevator and walk down the hallway and let herself into room 714. And I watched her set down her suitcase and sit on the edge of the bed and stare at the wall for exactly 4 minutes. Then I watched her open her laptop and begin reviewing her presentation slides. His name was Daniel, and I had loved him for 18 years. We met when I was 23, fresh out of graduate school, starting my first job at a development consultancy that worked primarily with emerging markets. He was an artist, a sculptor, though he hadn't sold anything yet, though he was still working at a frame shop to pay rent, though his studio apartment in Bushwick smelled like turpentine and ambition. I remember thinking he was the most alive person I had ever encountered. He talked with his hands. He laughed at inappropriate moments. He read poetry out loud while cooking dinner, Neruda and Rumi and Mary Oliver, stirring tomato sauce with a wooden spoon while reciting verses about the wild geese and the soft animal of your body. "You're too serious," he told me once, early on. We were in his bed, tangled in sheets that hadn't been washed in weeks, and he was tracing the line of my jaw with his finger. "You live in spreadsheets and projections. You need someone to remind you that the world is beautiful." I believed him. I believed him for 18 years. The presentation went well. I received several business cards and 2 follow-up meeting requests. I attended the networking reception and made appropriate small talk about carbon credits and green bonds and the challenges of financing public transit in secondary cities. I did not check my phone. At 11 p.m., alone in my hotel room, I finally read the additional messages he had sent throughout the day. "Please say something. I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. Her name is Mira. She's 28. We've been together for 2 years. The baby is 8 months old. A boy. His name is Leo. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry about a lot of things. But I'm not sorry about loving her. I can't be sorry about that. I read each message carefully, the way I might read a contract before signing, looking for clauses and conditions, for the fine print that would explain how we had arrived here. 2 years. He had been seeing her for 2 years. The baby was 8 months old, which meant she had been pregnant for 9 months before that, which meant he had known about the child for over a year while sharing my bed, eating my cooking, kissing my forehead before we fell asleep. I opened my laptop and logged into our bank accounts. The joint checking had been drained. The joint savings had been drained. But he had never had access to my personal accounts, the ones I had maintained since before we were married, the ones I had quietly continued funding throughout our marriage because my father had told me once, when I was 17, that a woman should always have her own money. He had also never had access to the investment portfolio I managed through my firm's employee program, or the retirement accounts, or the rental property I had purchased 3 years ago in my name only, in a neighborhood Daniel had once called soulless, because it was full of young professionals and new construction. I calculated the total, then I typed my response. "All right, nothing else." Just that single word. And then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. I should tell you something about my childhood. My mother left when I was 6. I don't mean she died. I mean she packed a suitcase while my father was at work and my brother and I were at school, and she drove away and she did not come back. For years, I thought she would. I kept my room clean. I got straight A's. I learned to cook dinner so my father wouldn't have to. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, she would hear about it somehow and realize she had made a mistake. She remarried when I was 12, a man in Arizona with a swimming pool and 2 golden retrievers. I know this because my father showed me the announcement in a newsletter from their college alumni association. He thought I should know. He thought it would help me understand that it wasn't about me. I think he was wrong. I think understanding made it worse. But I learned something from that experience, from those years of waiting and hoping and keeping my room clean for a woman who was never coming back. I learned that the people who leave don't do it because of anything you did or didn't do. They leave because they were always going to leave, because staying was never really in their nature, because some people are built for departure and some people are built for arrival, and you can't change which one someone is by loving them harder. You can only learn to see clearly what was there all along. The conference lasted 4 days. I attended panels on blended finance mechanisms and catalytic capital. I had dinner with a delegation from Norway. I toured a wind farm outside the city and took notes on their community engagement model. Each night, I returned to my hotel room and read Daniel's increasingly frantic messages. Why aren't you responding? Are you okay? I'm worried about you. Elaine, please, just say something. Anything. I know I hurt you. I know this is painful. But we need to talk about logistics. We need to figure out the separation agreement. I've talked to a lawyer. He says we can do this amicably. He says it doesn't have to be a war. Please call me. I can't stand this silence. I read them all, cataloged them all, and did not respond. On the final day of the conference, after my last meeting had concluded and my taxi to the airport had been confirmed, I sat in the hotel restaurant and ordered a glass of wine. It was mid-afternoon. The restaurant was nearly empty. A waiter brought me bread and butter and a small dish of olives. I ate slowly, deliberately, watching the light change through the window. Then I took out my phone and typed a message. I'll be landing at JFK tomorrow at 2:15 p.m. American Flight 762. I assume you'll want to see me in person to discuss the paperwork. His response came within seconds. Yes, I'll be there. Thank you for finally answering. I finished my wine, paid the check, and went upstairs to pack. The flight was 8 hours. I had a window seat. I watched the clouds pass beneath us, thick and white and utterly indifferent to human concerns. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the way he used to leave little notes in my luggage before work trips. Poems, sketches, sometimes just the words, I love you, written in his looping artist's handwriting on a torn piece of paper. I thought about the way he had stopped doing that 2 years ago. I had noticed at the time, had felt a small pang of disappointment when I opened my suitcase in Singapore and found nothing but my own carefully folded clothes. But I had assumed he was busy. I had assumed he was distracted by a new project, a new commission, a new creative obsession. I had not assumed there was a woman named Mira with long dark hair and a gentle voice, a woman who made him feel alive in ways I had apparently stopped doing. I had not assumed there was a child. The flight attendant offered me a blanket, and I accepted it. And I wrapped it around my shoulders and closed my eyes and did not sleep. Here is what I had learned over 18 years of marriage to a man who believed he was fundamentally good. Daniel did not see himself as a liar. He saw himself as someone who lived by his feelings, who followed his heart, who refused to be constrained by bourgeois conventions like fidelity and financial responsibility. When he spent our savings on a studio space he could not afford, he told himself he was investing in his art. When he forgot to pay the electric bill for 3 months, he told himself he was too consumed by creative vision to worry about mundane details. When he began an affair with a 26-year-old assistant at a gallery where his work was briefly displayed, he told himself he was honoring a profound spiritual connection. And when he sold our house and our car without my consent, he told himself he was making a clean break, giving us both a fresh start, freeing us from the material attachments that had weighed down our love. He did not see the cruelty in any of these choices. He saw only the narrative, the story of a sensitive artist trapped in a marriage to a practical woman who didn't understand him, finally breaking free to claim his authentic life. I had stopped trying to correct this narrative years ago. There was no point in arguing with someone who had already decided the story. But there were other ways to respond. I should tell you about the house. We had purchased it together 14 years ago with money I had saved from my bonuses and money his parents had given us as a wedding gift. A 3-bedroom colonial in a suburb with good schools and old trees, the kind of neighborhood where people walk their dogs in the evening and wave to each other across driveways. Daniel had hated it from the start. He called it suburban purgatory. He complained about the commute to his studio in the city, about the neighbors who talked too much about lawn care, about the silence that descended after 8 p.m., when there was nothing to do but read or watch television or make love to your wife. But he had agreed to buy it because I wanted it, because I had grown up in apartments and rentals, moving every few years when my father's job transferred him to a new city, and I had always wanted a house with roots, a place where I could plant a garden and watch it grow year after year. He had agreed because he loved me. Or because he said he loved me, which I had believed was the same thing. When I stopped believing that, I began making preparations. The preparations had begun 3 years ago. I did not know at that point that there was another woman. I did not know there would eventually be a child. I only knew that something had shifted between us, some tectonic plate of trust that had been slowly, imperceptibly sliding out of alignment. I knew that Daniel had become secretive about his phone, that he had started going to the studio at odd hours, coming home late and smelling like wine and something floral I didn't recognize, that he had stopped asking about my work trips, my projects, my hopes for the future. I knew that when I looked at him across the dinner table, I no longer saw the man who had recited Neruda while stirring tomato sauce. I saw a stranger who was biding his time. So I made preparations. I consulted a lawyer, not about divorce, not yet, but about asset protection, about what belonged to whom in a marriage where incomes were vastly unequal, about what would happen if certain properties were held in only one name. I opened accounts he didn't know about. I redirected portions of my bonuses into investments he couldn't access. I purchased the rental property in Williamsburg, the one he had mocked as soulless, and I told him it was a work opportunity, a development project, nothing he needed to concern himself with. He didn't concern himself. He never concerned himself with my work. I made preparations, and I waited, and I did not confront him because confrontation would have given him what he wanted, a dramatic scene, a chance to play the wounded artist, an excuse to leave in a cloud of righteous indignation. I preferred to let him think he was in control. I preferred to let him believe he was the one making choices. The plane began its descent. Through the window, I could see the gray sprawl of the city, the highways threading between neighborhoods, the tiny rectangles of houses and apartment buildings and shopping centers. Somewhere down there was the house where I had lived for 14 years, the garden I had planted, the kitchen where I had cooked dinner, while Daniel complained about suburban purgatory. Somewhere down there was Mira's apartment, wherever that was, with her 8-month-old child and her belief that she had won something worth winning. I thought about her, this woman I had never met, this woman who had loved my husband in secret for 2 years, who had borne his child while I was attending conferences and reviewing spreadsheets and coming home to a man who kissed my forehead before bed. I wondered if she knew what she was getting. I wondered if she understood that Daniel's love was not a destination but a departure, not a commitment but an escape, that he would love her the way he had loved me, fiercely and romantically, and without any comprehension of what love actually required, until he didn't anymore, until she became too familiar, too settled, too much like a home he had never really wanted. I wondered if she had made preparations. Probably not. She was 28. She had time to learn. The airport was crowded. Families reuniting, business travelers striding toward taxis. A man with a bouquet of roses waiting outside security, his face bright with anticipation. I walked through the terminal with my rolling suitcase, my laptop bag over my shoulder, my blazer slightly wrinkled from the flight. I had not slept. I had not eaten since the bread and olives in Copenhagen. I felt strangely weightless, as though I had left my body somewhere over the Atlantic and was now moving through the world as pure observation. I saw him before he saw me. He was pacing near the arrivals board, his phone pressed to his ear, his face tight with anxiety. He had lost weight. His hair was longer than usual, curling over his collar in a way that would have been romantic if I had still been capable of finding him romantic. He was wearing the blue sweater I had given him for his birthday 2 years ago, before I knew about Mira. I stopped walking. I stood in the middle of the corridor, passengers flowing around me like water around a stone, and I watched him. He saw me. His face went through a cascade of expressions. Relief, then uncertainty, then something I couldn't identify. He put away his phone. He took a step toward me. He stopped. "Elaine," he said. "Daniel." We stood there, 15 feet apart, in the fluorescent chaos of JFK, while strangers bustled past with their luggage and their reunions and their ordinary lives. "You didn't respond to any of my messages," he said. "I didn't know if you were okay. I thought maybe you—" "I said all right," I said. There wasn't anything else to say. He stared at me. "That's it? That's your response to everything I told you?" "What response did you want?" "I don't know." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I had seen 1,000 times, in 1,000 arguments, and always preceding some declaration of how misunderstood he felt. Anger, tears, something. You can't just say all right to the end of an 18-year marriage. I walked toward him, slowly pulling my suitcase behind me. When I was close enough to see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his temples, I stopped. "You sold the house?" I said. "Yes." "And the car?" "Yes." "Without my consent." I needed to make a clean break. I needed to show Mira that I was serious about starting over. "I see." He waited. He waited for the explosion that wasn't coming. "Elaine," he said, "say something. Yell at me. Tell me I'm a monster. But don't just stand there like this. It's terrifying." I considered this, the word terrifying deployed in this context, by a man who had lied to me for 2 years and stolen the home I had loved. "Let's go outside, Miki," I said. "We can talk in the car." "I don't have a car. I know. I'll call one." I took out my phone and requested a ride. He stood beside me, silent now, his hands in his pockets, radiating the kind of anxious energy that had once made me want to comfort him. I did not want to comfort him anymore. The driver was a woman named Patricia, who had a picture of her grandchildren on the dashboard and listened to jazz at a low volume. I gave her an address, not the house, which no longer belonged to us, but a coffee shop 3 blocks away. I needed neutral ground. We sat in the back seat, Daniel on one side, me on the other, the space between us full of everything we were not saying. "Who bought the house?" I asked. "A young couple. They're expecting their first child." "They seem nice." "How much did you sell it for?" He named a figure. It was lower than market value by about $70,000. "You sold it quickly," I said. "I wanted it done before you got back. I didn't want there to be complications." "You mean you didn't want me to have a say?" I meant what I said. I wanted a clean break. I looked out the window. We were on the expressway now, the city rising in the distance, its towers catching the afternoon light. "What did you do with the money?" I asked. "I put half in a new account for you, the other half—" He hesitated. "I used it to pay off some debts, and to help Mira with the deposit on a bigger apartment. She needed more space for the baby. You used our money to set up your new life." "It's not like that. I was going to explain—" "You were going to explain after the fact. After you had already made all the decisions. After there was nothing left for me to decide about." He turned to face me. In the dim light of the car, his features were softer than they had seemed in the terminal, more vulnerable. "I know you're angry," he said. "You have every right to be angry. But I couldn't keep living a lie, Elaine. I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not." "Who were you pretending to be?" "A husband who was happy, a man who didn't need—" He stopped. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." "You're so complete," he said. "You've always been complete. You don't need anyone. You have your work, your plans, your investment portfolios. You don't need me to feel whole, but I need to feel necessary. I need to feel like my existence matters to someone." "And you didn't feel that with me?" "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." We rode in silence for a while. Patricia changed lanes smoothly, avoiding a truck that had slowed in front of us. "I loved you," I said. "I know." "I still love you, part of me, the part that remembers who you used to be." He reached for my hand. I let him take it. His fingers were warm, familiar, the same fingers that had traced my jaw in his Bushwick apartment 20 years ago, that had written "I love you" notes in my luggage, that had sculpted beauty out of clay and bronze and found objects. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for how this happened." I looked at our intertwined hands, then I looked at his face. "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't change anything." The coffee shop was called The Wren. It had exposed brick and mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu that changed daily. I had never been there before. I had chosen it specifically because I had no memories attached to it. We sat at a table by the window. I ordered tea. Daniel ordered nothing, said he wasn't hungry, sat with his hands clasped on the table like a penitent waiting for confession. "There are some things you should know," I said. He looked up. "What things?" "About the house, about our finances, about what happens next." "I already talked to a lawyer. He said we can do a simple dissolution, split everything 50-50. "Daniel," I stopped him with a raised hand. "Listen to me. This is important." He fell silent. I could see the fear beginning to creep into his expression, the first hint that perhaps he had miscalculated, that perhaps his clean break was not as clean as he had imagined. "The house?" I said. "You sold it, but you didn't own it. Not entirely." "What do you mean? We bought it together. Both our names were on the deed." "That's true, but do you remember the refinancing we did 5 years ago when you needed money for the bronze casting project?" He nodded slowly. "You said it was a home equity line of credit." "It was, but there was also a conversion clause. In exchange for taking on the debt solely, I took primary ownership of the property. You signed the papers. I don't think you read them, but you signed them." His face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the house was 65% mine. You sold it without my consent, which means you committed fraud. The buyers have a legally compromised title. They could sue you. Probably will once they find out." I didn't know it. You didn't read the documents you signed." "That's not the same as not knowing." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The barista glanced over, then looked away. "This is a trick," he said. "You planned this. You set me up." "I prepared," I said. "That's different." "You knew I was going to leave." "I suspected, 2 years ago, when you started coming home late and smelling like someone else's perfume." He sat down again, heavily, as though his legs had given out. 2 years. You knew for 2 years and you didn't say anything?" "What would I have said?" "Daniel, I think you're having an affair." You would have denied it. You would have told me I was paranoid, insecure, trapped in my corporate mindset. You would have made me feel like the problem. So instead you just watched, waited, kept track. "Yes." He stared at me. In his eyes, I could see the narrative shifting, the story rewriting itself in real time. He was no longer the romantic hero breaking free from a loveless marriage. He was a man who had walked into a trap of his own making. "What else?" he asked. "What else don't I know?" I told him about the accounts. I told him about the rental property, about the investments he had never seen, about the retirement funds and the emergency savings and the careful financial architecture I had constructed over 15 years of marriage to a man who believed money was a bourgeois concern. I told him that the joint accounts he had drained represented about 12% of our actual marital assets, and that the remaining 88% was legally mine. I told him that his lawyer, whoever he was, had clearly not done proper discovery, or he would have known about all of this before advising Daniel to sell the house. I told him that the prenuptial agreement we had signed, the one he had laughed off as his parents' paranoia, contained clauses about infidelity and asset concealment that his behavior had activated. I told him calmly and clearly that if he wanted to contest any of this, he was welcome to try. My lawyers were very thorough. They had been preparing for this conversation for 3 years. When I finished, the tea had gone cold in my cup. The afternoon light had shifted from gold to gray. Daniel was sitting very still, staring at the table, his face the color of old paper. "Why?" he said. "Why did you do all this?" "Because I didn't want to be surprised," I said. "Because I grew up watching my mother leave and my father scramble to pick up the pieces, and I swore I would never be in that position. Because I learned a long time ago that love is not a protection, love is just a feeling, and feelings end." "But you said you still love me." "Part of me does, the part that remembers, but that part doesn't make decisions." He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Genuine curiosity, genuine attention, as though he were seeing me for the first time. "You're not who I thought you were, Dee," he said. "No," I agreed. "I'm not." I should tell you about my work. For 20 years, I had specialized in development finance, the complicated business of funding infrastructure projects in places where traditional capital feared to tread. Bridges in Bangladesh, water treatment in Kenya, public transit in secondary cities across Southeast Asia. It was not glamorous work. It involved spreadsheets and conference calls and dense legal documents about public-private partnerships and credit enhancement mechanisms. Daniel had never understood it, had never tried to understand it, had always referred to it vaguely as your corporate stuff, with a slight curl of distaste in his voice. But I loved it. I loved the puzzle of it, how to make the numbers work, how to align incentives, how to build something that would outlast the political cycles and the market fluctuations, and the inevitable human tendency toward short-term thinking. I had built a career on patience, on preparation, on the understanding that complex systems take time to construct, and that the most elegant solutions are often invisible to everyone except the people who design them. Daniel had always seen my work as the opposite of art, mechanical, soulless, concerned with mundane practicalities rather than transcendent beauty. He was wrong, of course. Finance was its own kind of art. It was the art of making things possible that had seemed impossible. The art of connecting resources to needs across vast distances of geography and time. But I had stopped trying to explain this to him years ago. Some things can only be understood through experience. We sat in the coffee shop until the light outside was gone, and the barista had begun giving us pointed looks. Daniel had not spoken in almost an hour. He had asked a few questions about the prenuptial agreement, about the refinancing documents, about what exactly his legal exposure might be, and I had answered them honestly, without embellishment, the way I might brief a colleague on a complex transaction. And now he was simply sitting, staring out the window at the darkening street, looking older than I had ever seen him. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "That depends on you." "What do you mean?" "You have choice. You can contest the prenuptial agreement. It's possible you'd find a judge who would be sympathetic, though I doubt it given the infidelity clauses. You can try to fight for the house sale, claim you didn't understand what you were signing, also unlikely to succeed, but possible. Or you can accept the situation and move forward." "Move forward to what?" "To your new life. Mira and the baby, the future you wanted badly enough to lie for." He flinched at the word lie. Even now, after everything, he didn't like thinking of himself as a Warren. "You planned this," he said again. "You knew I was going to leave, and you planned all of this." "I prepared for the possibility. That's different from planning." "How is it different?" I considered the question. It was a fair one, actually. The distinction mattered to me, even if it didn't matter to him. "Planning would mean I wanted this to happen," I said. "Preparing means I accepted that it might. I didn't make you have an affair, Daniel. I didn't make you father a child with another woman. I didn't make you sell our house without my consent. Those were your choices. I just made sure your choices wouldn't destroy me." "So this is what, revenge?" "No." I shook my head. "Revenge would be vindictive. This isn't vindictive. This is just reality. The reality of what you did and the consequences that follow from it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed. A short, bitter sound, completely without humor. "You're incredible," he said. "You know that? 18 years of marriage, and I never knew who you really were." "You never asked." I went to a hotel that night, not because I had nowhere else to go. I could have stayed at the rental property in Williamsburg, could have called any of a dozen friends who would have offered their guest room without question. But because I wanted solitude. I wanted to be alone in a neutral space surrounded by nothing that had memories attached to it. The room was on the 23rd floor of a tower in Midtown. I stood at the window for a long time looking out at the city lights, thinking about all the lives being lived in all those illuminated windows, all the love and betrayal and preparation happening behind glass that looked identical from the outside. I thought about Daniel, probably back at Mira's apartment by now, explaining to her that things had not gone as expected, that the clean break had been messier than anticipated, that the wife he had dismissed as a corporate drone for 18 years had turned out to be more formidable than he had imagined. I wondered how Mira was taking the news. I wondered if she was comforting him, reassuring him that they would figure it out together, that their love was strong enough to survive the setback. I hoped, for her sake, that she was right, but I suspected she wasn't. The legal proceedings took 7 months. Daniel's lawyer, once he understood the full scope of the situation, advised a settlement. Daniel, predictably, resisted at first. He wanted to fight. He wanted to prove that I had manipulated him, that the documents he had signed were obtained through some kind of fraud or coercion. But there was no evidence of fraud. There was only evidence of a man who didn't read the papers his wife put in front of him, who signed whatever she asked without question because he trusted her and because he found legal documents boring. His lawyer explained patiently and repeatedly that this was not a compelling narrative for a judge. Eventually, Daniel signed the settlement. He received a modest lump sum, enough to cover his debts and provide a small cushion while he figured out his next steps. He retained his art and his studio equipment and his intellectual property rights. He was released from any liability related to the house sale in exchange for acknowledging my primary ownership and paying a portion of the difference between his unauthorized sale price and the actual market value. I received everything else. I did not gloat. I did not make any statements to the press or the extended family or the mutual friends who had expressed shock and sympathy when news of the divorce became public. I simply signed the documents, transferred the funds, and moved on with my life. Some people interpreted this as coldness. I understood why, but coldness was not what I felt. What I felt was clarity, the particular clarity that comes from preparing for something terrible and then surviving it exactly as you had planned. There is a story I used to tell myself about my marriage. In this story, I was a practical woman who had fallen in love with a romantic man, and our differences complemented each other perfectly. He taught me to appreciate beauty. I gave him stability. Together we created something balanced and whole. I believed this story for a long time. I believed it even when the evidence began to contradict it, when his spontaneity started to feel like irresponsibility, when his romantic gestures started to feel like performances, when his artistic sensitivity started to feel like an excuse for never finishing anything. I believed it because I wanted to believe it, because the alternative, that I had built my adult life around a person who didn't actually see me, who loved an idea of me rather than the reality, was too painful to accept. But I had learned, watching my mother leave, that painful truths don't become less true because you refuse to look at them. They just become more destructive when they finally force their way into view. So I looked, I saw, I prepared, and when the story finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, I was ready. 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Daniel at a gallery opening. I hadn't planned to attend. A colleague had invited me, said there was an interesting new sculptor whose work I might appreciate. I went because I was trying to be the kind of person who said yes to things, who didn't retreat entirely into work in solitude. I saw him across the room before he saw me. He was standing with a group of people I didn't recognize, holding a glass of wine, laughing at something someone had said. He looked good, thinner than I remembered, but not unhealthily so. His hair was longer. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize. I considered leaving. I had no obligation to speak to him, no desire to perform the awkward dance of ex-spouses encountering each other in public. But before I could move, he looked up. His eyes met mine. And for a moment, neither of us moved. Then he walked toward me. "Elaine," he said. "Daniel." We stood there, in the midst of the gallery crowd, surrounded by sculptures made of tire and found objects and crushed aluminum cans. You look well, he said. So do you. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here. He nodded as though this made perfect sense. How are you? Good? Busy? The usual. Still saving the world one infrastructure project at a time? Something like that. He smiled. A genuine smile without the edge of condescension I remembered. I always admired that about you, even when I didn't understand it. The way you could see so far ahead, the way you could plan for things that hadn't happened yet. It's a professional hazard. No, he said. It's who you are. I looked at him, really looked for the first time in years. He had aged. We both had. But there was something different in his face now, something more settled, less hungry. How is Mira? I asked. His smile faltered just for a moment. She's fine. We're taking some space, trying to figure things out. I see. Leo is great, though. He's 2 now, walking, talking, destroying everything in his path. He's amazing. I'm glad. We stood there for another moment, 2 people who had once shared a life, now sharing only this small pocket of silence in a crowded room. I never thanked you, he said finally. For what? For not destroying me. You could have. Oh, when you found out about everything, about Mira, about the house, you could have made my life hell. A lot of people would have. What would have been the point? Revenge? Satisfaction? Whatever it is that makes people want to hurt the people who hurt them. I thought about this. I thought about all the nights I had lain awake in hotel rooms reading his messages, feeling the rage and grief and betrayal coursing through me like electricity. I didn't want to hurt you, I said. I just wanted to not be destroyed. He nodded slowly. I think I finally understand that. It took me a while, but I understand it now. Good. Elaine. He reached out, not quite touching my arm, just letting his hand hover in the space between us. I know this doesn't change anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry, genuinely, truly sorry for all of it. I looked at his hand, then I looked at his face. I know, I said. I believe you. And I did. For the first time, I believed he understood. Not just what he had done, but what it had meant. Both of us. All of us. Take care of yourself, Daniel. You too, Elaine. I turned and walked away, through the crowd of gallery goers, past the sculptures of wire and crushed aluminum, out into the cool night air. I did not look back. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from being underestimated. For 18 years, Daniel had seen me as a supporting character in his story, the practical wife who handled the boring details while he pursued his artistic vision. He had never imagined that I was capable of strategy, of patience, of the kind of long-term planning that his spontaneous soul found incomprehensible. He had never imagined that I was watching, learning, preparing. This was not his fault exactly. It was simply the limitation of a certain kind of romantic imagination, the kind that sees what it expects to see, that casts people in roles and then refuses to let them exceed their lines. But I had never agreed to play the role he assigned me. I had simply let him think I was playing it while quietly building something else entirely. This is what I had learned over all those years of watching and waiting. The people who underestimate you give you room to work. They leave gaps in their defenses because they don't believe you're capable of exploiting them. They tell you their plans because they don't think you're smart enough to use the information. Daniel had told me in 1,000 small ways exactly who he was and what he was likely to do. He had told me through his complaints about suburban purgatory, through his restlessness at dinner parties, through the way his eyes always drifted to younger women with artistic aspirations. He had told me, and I had listened, and I had prepared, not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew that when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. 3 years after the divorce, I received a letter. It was handwritten on cream-colored paper, addressed to my office. The return address was a studio in Brooklyn that I didn't recognize. Dear Elaine, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know our last conversation was supposed to be our last conversation, but I've been working on something, and I wanted you to know about it. It's a series of sculptures about marriage, about the way two people can live together for years and never really see each other, about the things we hide and the things we reveal and the space in between. One of the pieces is called Preparation. It's a figure of a woman standing at a window looking out at something that the viewer can't see. In her hands, she's holding documents, contracts, legal papers, evidence. Her face is calm, patient. She's not angry, she's just ready. I made it thinking about you, about what it must have been like all those years watching me and waiting and knowing that someday you would need to protect yourself. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I finally see you. Daniel. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath a stack of old project reports and conference programs. I did not respond, but sometimes late at night when I'm working alone in my office and the city lights are glittering outside my window, I think about that sculpture. A woman at a window, documents in her hands, her face calm and patient and ready. I wonder if he got it right. I am 45 now. The divorce is ancient history, one of those stories that people tell at dinner parties when they want to illustrate something about human nature, about betrayal, about preparation, about the quiet devastation of realizing that someone you loved never really knew you. I still work in development finance. I still attend conferences and review spreadsheets and negotiate complex deals between governments and private capital. I still find satisfaction in the puzzle of it, making the numbers work, aligning incentives, building things that will outlast me. I have not remarried, not because I'm opposed to it, but because I haven't met anyone who makes me want to try again. The relationships I've had since Daniel have been pleasant, meaningful in their own way, but I no longer believe in the kind of romantic surrender that my 23-year-old self once found irresistible. I believe in preparation now, in clarity, in seeing people as they are rather than as I want them to be. Some people might call this cynicism. I call it wisdom, earned the hard way. Let me tell you about the text message. When Daniel sent it, "I'm leaving you for her. We have a child together. I've already sold the house and the car." He expected a certain response. He expected tears, rage, desperate pleas for him to reconsider. He expected the dramatic scene that would confirm his narrative of himself as a romantic hero breaking free from a loveless marriage. He did not expect, "All right." That single word haunted him for months. He told me later during one of our settlement negotiations that he had stayed up all night after sending that text, waiting for my explosion, checking his phone every few minutes for the tirade that never came. He said the silence was worse than any anger he could have imagined. I didn't plan it that way. I didn't type "all right" as a strategic move, designed to maximize his psychological torment. I typed it because it was true. Because after years of watching and preparing, after learning to see him clearly without the distortions of hope or denial, I had arrived at a place of genuine acceptance. He was leaving. He had already left in every way that mattered. The text was just the formal announcement of a departure that had happened long before. All right was the only honest response. But here's the part I didn't tell him. The part I've never told anyone until now. When I received that text, standing in the lobby of the Radisson Blu with my rolling suitcase and my crooked lanyard badge, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not relief that he was leaving. That part still hurt, still cut through layers of preparation and clarity and reached something raw beneath. But relief that the waiting was over. Relief that I no longer had to wonder when it would happen or how or whether I had prepared enough. For 3 years, I had lived in a state of suspended animation, knowing something was wrong but not knowing exactly what, building defenses against a threat I couldn't quite name. It was exhausting. It was lonely. It was the particular kind of loneliness that comes from living with someone who doesn't see you, who wouldn't recognize the truth of your life even if you told them directly. Daniel's text ended all of that. It transformed the unknown into the known, the threat into the reality, the endless waiting into the clear action of response. All right. I said it because it was true, because after all the preparation, after all the quiet work of protecting myself, I was all right. Not happy, not unscathed, but all right. That is not nothing. At the airport, when Daniel asked me what had happened, what I had planned, I told him the truth. Everything went just as I planned, I said. He heard revenge, he heard a confession that I had manipulated him, tricked him, orchestrated his downfall for some kind of twisted satisfaction, but that's not what I meant. What I meant was simpler and sadder. I meant that I had prepared for him to leave, I had prepared for him to betray me, I had prepared for the worst case scenario, and then watched it unfold exactly as I had feared. I did not plan his betrayal, I did not cause it, I simply saw it coming and made sure I would survive. Everything went just as I planned was not a statement of triumph. It was a statement of loss, the loss of hope, the loss of illusion, the loss of the marriage I had once believed in. It was the statement of a woman who had learned through painful experience that preparation is not the same as control. That you cannot prevent people from hurting you. You can only make sure their damage does not destroy you entirely. I think sometimes about my mother. She left when I was 6. She remarried when I was 12. She built a new life in Arizona with a man who had a swimming pool and golden retrievers, while my father and brother and I learned to manage without her. For years, I told myself a story about her, that she was selfish, weak, incapable of love, that she abandoned us because she didn't care, because we didn't matter, because she was fundamentally broken in some way that made loyalty impossible. But I'm not sure that story is true. I'm not sure anymore that any of the stories we tell about the people who leave us are true. Maybe she left because she was unhappy. Maybe she left because she couldn't breathe in the life she had built, the expectations she had agreed to, the roles she'd been assigned. Maybe she left because staying would have destroyed her and she chose survival over sacrifice. I don't know. I never asked her. I never reached out after the divorce announcement, never tried to understand her side of the story. I just let her become a cautionary tale, a lesson in what not to do, a negative example that I defined myself against. But here's what I think now, from the perspective of a woman who has also survived a marriage that was slowly suffocating her. Maybe we're not so different, my mother and I. Maybe the difference is not that she ran and I stayed. Maybe the difference is simply in the method. She escaped through departure, and I escaped through preparation. Both of us built new lives. Both of us survived. I don't know if that makes us the same or if it makes us opposite. I don't know if I've forgiven her or if forgiveness is even the right framework for thinking about what she did. I only know that I understand her better now than I did when I was 6 or 12 or 23. And that understanding is its own kind of peace. Let me tell you the real story, the one that doesn't fit neatly into the narrative of betrayal and revenge and triumph. The real story is that I love Daniel. I loved him for 18 years, through all his failures and frustrations and romantic delusions. I loved him even when I knew he was having an affair, even when I was building defenses against him, even when I was preparing for the day he would leave. Love is not incompatible with clarity. That's one of the things I've learned. You can love someone and still see them clearly. You can love someone and still protect yourself from the harm they're capable of causing. Daniel never understood this. He believed that love required surrender, required the abandonment of self-preservation, required closing your eyes and leaping without looking. He believed that my preparation was evidence of coldness, of calculation, of a fundamental lack of romantic feeling. But he was wrong. My preparation was an expression of love, not love for him necessarily, but love for myself, for the life I wanted to build, for the future I wanted to protect. It was love that made me pay attention, love that made me plan, love that made me refuse to be destroyed. When I said all right to his text message, I was not expressing indifference. I was expressing the hard-won wisdom of a woman who had learned to love herself more than she needed any particular relationship to survive. That's not coldness. That's something else entirely. The last time I saw Daniel was 2 years ago at a mutual friend's retirement party. He was there with a woman I didn't recognize. Not Mira, someone new. She was closer to his age, with silver in her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She looked at him with the kind of patient affection that suggested she knew exactly who he was and had decided to love him anyway. I hoped for her sake that she also knew how to prepare. We spoke briefly, the polite exchange of former spouses who have finally reached something like peace. He told me about Leo, now 5 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs. He told me about his new series of sculptures, inspired by migration patterns and climate change. He told me about the therapy he'd been doing, the insights he'd gained, the ways he was trying to be different. I listened. I nodded. I wished him well. And then I went home to my apartment, the one I bought after the divorce, in a building with doormen and high ceilings and views of the park. I poured myself a glass of wine. I sat by the window and watched the lights of the city come on one by one until the darkness was filled with illumination. I thought about all the things I had built, all the preparations I had made, all the ways I had protected myself from the worst-case scenarios that kept unfolding in other people's lives, and I thought about how strange it is that the things we do to survive can also be the things that define us, how the defenses we build against pain can become the architecture of our personalities, the shape of our souls. I am a woman who prepares, a woman who watches, a woman who sees clearly and acts accordingly. I am also a woman who loved a man for 18 years and lost him and survived. Both of these things are true. Both of these things are me. There is a question I have never been able to answer, not even in the quiet hours of the night when I am most honest with myself. Was it worth it? The preparation, the vigilance, the years of watching and waiting and building walls against a threat that finally arrived exactly as I had predicted. Was it worth it to survive so completely, to emerge from the wreckage of my marriage with my finances intact and my dignity preserved and my life fundamentally unchanged? I don't know. Some days I think yes. I think about Daniel, scrambling to explain to Mira why the clean break he had promised was suddenly so complicated. I think about the settlement negotiations, his lawyer's face when he finally understood the scope of what I had built. I think about walking away from the divorce, with everything I needed to continue my life, without interruption. Those days, the preparation feels like wisdom, like strength, like the best possible response to an impossible situation. But other days, I wonder if all that watching and planning cost me something I can never get back. Some capacity for surrender, for trust, for the kind of romantic abandon that Daniel always said I lacked. I wonder if I would have been happier if I had been less careful. If I had loved him blindly, foolishly, without the constant vigilance that kept me safe but also kept me separate. I wonder if safety and joy are compatible or if we always have to choose. I don't have an answer. I'm not sure there is one. Here is what I know for certain. When Daniel sent me that text message, I was standing in the lobby of a hotel in Copenhagen, 8,000 miles from home, about to present on public-private partnership models to 300 attendees from 47 countries. I was alone. I was exhausted. I was learning in real time that the life I had built over 18 years was dissolving behind my back. And I typed all right. I typed it because it was true. Because after all the years of preparation, I was all right. Not happy, not unscathed, but all right. And when I returned home, when Daniel met me at the airport with his face full of panic and confusion, I told him that everything had gone just as I planned. Not because I was gloating, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because it was true. Everything had gone exactly as I had feared, exactly as I had prepared for, exactly as I had known in my bones it would go ever since the day I realized I was married to a man who didn't see me. The preparation had worked, the walls had held, the woman I had built, layer by layer, over years of quiet effort, had survived. That is not revenge, that is not triumph. That is just what survival looks like, when you've been watching long enough to know it's coming. I am finishing this story now, late at night, in the apartment I bought after the divorce. The city lights are glittering outside my window. Somewhere out there, Daniel is living his life, with the new woman, with Leo, with whatever version of himself he has managed to construct from the wreckage of his romantic delusions. And I am here, still working, still planning, still preparing for threats I cannot name but have learned to anticipate. It's a quiet life. Not the life I imagined when I was 23, falling in love with a man who recited poetry while stirring tomato sauce. But it's mine. I built it. I protected it. I refuse to let it be destroyed. Maybe that's enough. Maybe survival is its own kind of victory, even when it doesn't feel like one. Maybe the woman who says all right to the text that was supposed to destroy her has already won in the only way that matters. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. But I'm all right. After everything, the love, the betrayal, the preparation, the loss, I am all right, and that I think is the whole story.